Most people don't fail to quit bad habits because they are weak. They fail because they were taught to fight themselves. Every time you try to quit scrolling, quit procrastinating, quit overeating, or quit wasting time, you are told the same thing: be stronger, try harder, use more willpower. And maybe it works for a few days, a week, if you're lucky. Then everything quietly returns to the way it was before, and you blame yourself for not being disciplined enough. But what if the problem was never your willpower at all? What if forcing yourself is the very reason you keep failing? In Japan, many people manage to quit bad habits in a way that looks almost effortless from the outside. Not because they are more motivated than you, and not because they are born more disciplined, but because they don't rely on willpower to begin with. They don't battle their impulses head on. Instead, they quietly remove the need to fight. In this video, you'll discover why trying harder often makes change more difficult, how the Japanese approach habit change in a completely different way, and why their method works even when motivation is low and energy is gone. This isn't about becoming stricter with yourself. It's about understanding how behavior actually forms, and how small shifts around you can change what you do without constant effort. If you're interested in personal growth that feels calm, practical, and sustainable, not loud motivation or empty discipline, consider subscribing to the channel. The ideas you're about to hear may completely change how you think about habits, self-control, and why real change is usually much quieter than you expect. Almost everyone watching this already knows what they want to change. You don't need another list of goals or another reminder of what's bad for you. You know exactly which habits are draining your time, your energy, or your focus. You promise yourself you'll stop scrolling at night, wake up earlier, eat better, work more consistently, or finally break a pattern you've been stuck in for years. And each time, you begin with optimism. This time feels different. This time you're serious. Yet the pattern repeats itself with painful accuracy. A strong start, followed by resistance, then excuses, then guilt. Eventually, you stop trying altogether, not because you don't care, but because failing over and over quietly convinces you that something must be wrong with you. The truth is, nothing is wrong with you. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do: conserve energy, seek comfort, and repeat familiar behaviors, especially when life is busy or stressful. This is where most advice gets it wrong. We're told that successful people simply have more self-control, more grit, more mental strength. But if that were true, quitting bad habits would get easier over time, not harder. Instead, the more you rely on willpower, the faster it burns out. Willpower isn't a skill you build once and keep forever. It's a limited resource, and every decision, every demand, every emotional hit drains it a little more. The Japanese approach starts with a very different assumption. Instead of asking, "How can I force myself to stop?" they ask, "Why does this behavior keep happening in the first place? And more importantly, what around me is making it easy to repeat?" This shift in thinking changes everything. Because when you stop blaming yourself and start observing your environment, habits stop feeling like personal failures and start looking like predictable outcomes. And once you see habits this way, you realize something unsettling but freeing. Most of your daily actions were never really choices at all. They were reactions. Reactions to your surroundings, your routines, and the silent cues you encounter every day without noticing. Understanding this is the first step, and in a moment, we'll step into how this way of thinking quietly shapes everyday life in Japan. At this point, it's important to say something that most self-improvement advice avoids. Willpower is not your solution. In fact, relying on it is often the fastest way to fail. Willpower feels powerful in the moment, especially at the beginning, but it is fragile. It depends on your mood, your energy, your stress level, and even how much sleep you got the night before. That's why you can feel unstoppable in the morning and completely give up by night. This isn't a personal flaw. It's biological. Every time you force yourself to resist an urge, you create friction inside your brain. And friction costs energy. The more decisions you make, the more resistance you face, the weaker that force becomes. By the end of the day, your brain naturally defaults to whatever is easiest, most familiar, and most comfortable. That's not laziness, that's efficiency. The mistake most people make is believing that successful change comes from becoming mentally tougher. But the Japanese mindset quietly rejects this idea. Instead of glorifying self-control, they minimize the need for it. They don't admire people who constantly struggle against temptation. They admire systems that make temptation unnecessary. This is why trying harder often backfires. The more you frame habit change as a battle, the more exhausted you become. And exhaustion always favors old patterns. The Japanese approach doesn't ask, "How strong can I be today?" It asks, "How can I make the right choice the default option?" When you stop depending on inner strength and start shaping outer conditions, behavior begins to change without drama, motivation speeches, or daily self-negotiation. And this is where the shift truly begins. Because once you stop seeing habits as a test of character and start seeing them as a design problem, everything opens up. To understand how this works in practice, we need to step away from theory and look at how everyday life in Japan is quietly structured to reduce bad habits before they even form. To really understand this approach, you have to stop thinking in abstract ideas and start looking at daily life. Imagine walking through a typical Japanese neighborhood. The streets are quiet, the spaces are clean, uncluttered, and intentionally designed. There are fewer loud distractions fighting for your attention. Fewer impulsive triggers pulling you in different directions. Nothing is screaming for you to consume more, rush more, or react more. This isn't accidental. Japanese society places a strong emphasis on order, simplicity, and consideration for shared space. And that philosophy quietly extends into personal behavior. When the environment is calm, the mind follows. When temptation is not constantly placed in front of you, self-control stops feeling like a daily struggle. Good behavior becomes the natural outcome, not a heroic effort. Look at something as simple as food. Convenience stores exist everywhere in Japan, yet overeating is far less common than in many other countries. Why? Because portions are smaller, packaging is intentional, and excess is subtly discouraged. The environment guides behavior without needing reminders or rules. The same principle applies to work, transportation, and even social habits. This is the core difference. In many cultures, people try to fix themselves while leaving their surroundings untouched. In Japan, the surroundings do most of the work. Instead of asking individuals to resist temptation all day long, the system reduces how often temptation appears in the first place. And when temptation is rare, willpower becomes almost irrelevant. Once you see this, an uncomfortable realization appears. Your habits may not be the result of who you are, but of where you are. Your room layout, your phone placement, the apps you open first, the food you keep within reach. These details quietly decide your behavior long before motivation ever gets involved. And this leads us to the first practical principle behind the Japanese method of quitting bad habits, a principle that has nothing to do with discipline and everything to do with design. The first principle behind how Japanese people quit bad habits is surprisingly simple, yet deeply uncomfortable for most people to accept. They don't try to change themselves first. They change what surrounds them. Instead of asking for more discipline, they quietly remove friction in the right direction and add friction where it matters. If a habit feels hard to quit, the Japanese mindset assumes something important. The habit is being supported by the environment, not by personality, not by weakness. If something is easy to access, easy to repeat, and easy to justify, it will continue. So rather than relying on constant self-control, the goal becomes making the bad habit slightly inconvenient, not impossible, just less automatic. This is why you rarely see dramatic declarations or extreme detoxes. There's no starting Monday, no heroic vow to never fail again. Small, practical adjustments do the work. If a phone causes distraction, it's placed out of reach. If junk food invites mindless eating, it simply isn't kept nearby. If something creates unnecessary temptation, it quietly disappears from the immediate environment. What's important here is subtlety. The change doesn't feel like punishment. There is no inner battle. The brain doesn't feel threatened. Instead, behavior shifts naturally because the easiest option has changed. When effort is no longer required, consistency becomes possible, even on bad days, tired days, or unmotivated days. This is where most people misunderstand the idea of discipline. True discipline, in the Japanese sense, is not about resisting urges. It's about not needing to resist them in the first place. When the environment supports the behavior you want, Willpower becomes a backup tool, not the main engine. And once this principle is understood, something powerful happens. You stop asking, "Why can't I control myself?" and start asking, "Why is this behavior so easy to repeat?" That question alone shifts the entire game. But the Japanese approach doesn't stop there. Changing the environment is only the first layer, and the next principle explains why tiny actions matter far more than dramatic ones. The second principle behind the Japanese approach is even more counterintuitive. They don't aim for big change. They aim for changes so small they almost feel meaningless. While many people believe transformation requires dramatic effort, the Japanese mindset assumes the opposite, that large goals create resistance, while small actions slip past the brain's defenses. Big goals trigger fear. They demand motivation, planning, and emotional energy. Small actions do not. A tiny behavior doesn't threaten your identity, your comfort, or your routine. It doesn't feel like a commitment. It feels easy to ignore, and that's exactly why it works. The brain accepts it without protest. Instead of deciding to wake up early, the change might begin with simply placing your feet on the floor when the alarm rings. Instead of quitting a bad habit completely, the goal might be to delay it by just a few minutes. These actions seem insignificant, but they serve a powerful purpose. They create continuity. And continuity is far more important than intensity. In Japanese culture, progress is often measured quietly. Improvement is not about sudden breakthroughs, but about steady refinement. A habit repeated consistently, even at the smallest scale, rewires behavior over time. The brain starts to associate the action with normality, not effort. What once felt like resistance slowly becomes routine. This is why the Japanese approach avoids motivation-based change. Motivation rises and falls. Small actions do not depend on motivation, they depend on structure. When the action is easy enough to do even on your worst day, it becomes reliable. And reliability is what habits are built on. At first, these changes don't feel impressive. There is no rush of achievement, no sense of transformation, but beneath the surface, something important is happening. The brain is learning a new pattern without realizing it's being trained. And once that pattern exists, scaling it up becomes natural, not forced. But there's an even deeper reason why small actions work so well. It has nothing to do with discipline, and everything to do with how the brain seeks comfort and efficiency. To understand that, we need to look at what the brain truly wants, and why ease always wins. The third principle explains why the previous two work so well. At its core, the human brain is not designed to chase growth or self-improvement. It is designed to conserve energy. Every action you take carries a cost, and the brain is constantly scanning for the option that requires the least effort with the most immediate reward. This is why habits exist in the first place. Once a behavior becomes familiar, the brain automates it to save energy. No decision, no resistance, just action. When people try to quit bad habits through force, they fight directly against this system. They ask the brain to spend more energy every day, and the brain naturally resists. The Japanese approach doesn't oppose this mechanism. It works with it. Instead of demanding effort, it redesigns the path of least resistance. When the easier option aligns with the desired behavior, change happens quietly, not because you are trying harder, but because the brain simply follows what feels natural. This is also why motivation is unreliable. Motivation asks the brain to do extra work today for a reward that comes later. Ease offers an immediate payoff. When an action feels simple, familiar, and low risk, the brain accepts it without negotiation. Over time, what once required conscious effort becomes automatic, not through repetition alone, but through reduced friction. Think about how often you default to behaviors without thinking. Unlocking your phone, opening certain apps, reaching for food, delaying tasks. These actions feel effortless because the environment supports them. The Japanese method applies this same logic in reverse. By removing ease from bad habits and adding ease to good ones, behavior shifts without internal conflict. Once you understand this, a powerful realization emerges. You don't need to control your brain. You need to guide it. And guidance doesn't come from pressure, it comes from simplicity. When life is structured to make the right choice easier, self-control becomes optional. And this is where everything comes together. Because understanding the brain is one thing, But applying this knowledge to your own life is where real change begins. In the next part, we'll bring these principles home and show how you can use them, no matter where you live or how long you've struggled. Now, let's bring this back to you. Not to Japan, not to culture, not to theory, because the real value of this approach is not where it comes from, but how easily it can be applied to your own life. Starting today, without waiting for motivation or a fresh start. Instead of asking yourself why you lack discipline, ask a different set of questions. Where does this habit usually happen? What time of day does it appear? What triggers it? Boredom, stress, convenience, or proximity? When you answer honestly, patterns begin to reveal themselves. And once you see the pattern, you stop feeling powerless. The goal is not to eliminate the habit through force. The goal is to redesign the conditions that support it. If a bad habit happens because something is within reach, move it slightly out of reach. If it happens because something is too easy, make it slightly inconvenient. You don't need to block it completely. You just need to interrupt the automatic flow. At the same time, apply the opposite logic to the behavior you want. Make it easier to start than to avoid. Reduce the steps. Lower the barrier. Remove friction wherever possible. When the right action requires less effort than the wrong one, the brain switches sides without resistance. This approach doesn't rely on belief, discipline, or identity change. You don't have to see yourself differently. You don't have to become a new person. You simply adjust the environment and let behavior follow. And when behavior changes consistently, identity updates on its own, quietly, without pressure. The most important thing to understand is this: progress doesn't feel dramatic when it's working. It feels almost boring. There are no breakthroughs, no emotional highs, just fewer internal battles, fewer moments of regret, and fewer decisions that drain your energy. That calmness is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that the system is finally doing the work for you. And when you experience that shift, even once, you realize something deeply freeing. Change was never about forcing yourself to be better. It was about making better behavior easier to live with. In the end, the difference between people who change and people who stay stuck is rarely willpower. Japanese people are not stronger than you, more motivated than you, or more disciplined by nature. They simply don't make life harder than it needs to be. Instead of forcing themselves to resist temptation every day, they design their surroundings so that temptation loses its power. When you stop turning habits into a personal battle, something shifts. You conserve energy. You stop blaming yourself. And change begins to feel calm instead of exhausting. The right behavior no longer requires constant effort. It becomes the default. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped fighting how the brain actually works. If there's one idea to take away from this video, it's this: real change doesn't come from pressure. It comes from alignment. When your environment supports the person you want to become, progress happens quietly, almost unnoticed, until one day you realize the habit no longer controls you. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you found value in this perspective and want to explore more ideas about personal growth, habits, and quiet transformation, consider subscribing to the channel. New videos are created for people who want to change without burning themselves out. Until next time, take care, and remember, you don't need more willpower. You just need a better system.